You have to come out. You have to come closer.
Yeah, I'll come closer. We start with Joseph this week.
Oh, we're gonna do Hanukkah.
There's a problem, or I found a problem trying to sign on.
Yeah.
It says sign on with Google.
For YouTube.
Yeah, no, this is the sign my piece.
Okay.
So no, it says, I don't know, sign on, so it's come to lecture. So then I sign on it and it gives me some choices. Do you want to change your email?
Uh-huh.
I use AOL.
Right.
Among the last ones. And so I use my AOL password. Doesn't work. I don't.
That's weird. To get onto YouTube?
I didn't get on. I don't know. I use the same thing every Shabbos.
Uh-huh.
To go to the Torah class. Anyway,
Great.
relax while you have a chance. I can't believe what you've been doing.
Okay, we're gonna start because people are watching online.
Ready for you?
I think so. Oops.
I'm not in your way, am I?
Never. Let's just see if it's on here.
Does that tell you how many people are there?
1 second. Okay, testing. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Sinai Temple, near and far. Actually reminds me of Hanukkah because it's about the few versus the many. And so we are representing that here in Cone Chapel. I want to give a shout out to my good friend Don Lowe's, who is here with us, and good to have you here studying Torah together. So usually we'll do a mitzvah of a month within the Parsha, but because tomorrow night begins the holiday of Hanukkah, we need to investigate the meaning behind Hanukkah and also, of course, its relation to what's happening in the world today. And as we all know, that Hanukkah is not a holiday in the Torah, but rather a rabbinic holiday. So there's some interesting interpretations of how we get from a minor holiday to what it actually has become today. And so, the first question that we have to ask when you talk about Hanukkah is, in Aramaic, my Hanukkah, which is, what is Hanukkah? And the only place you have to find that is in the Talmud, and it's in the tractate of Shabbat, because they speak about lighting candles. And if you're going to talk about lighting Shabbat candles, then of course that leads to lighting Hanukkah candles. And so I'm going to read for you first, my Hanukkah. What is Hanukkah? The Talmud says, שנכנסו יוונים להיכל טימאו כל השמנים בהיכל ושגברה מלכות בית החשמונאי וניצחים בדקו ולא מצאו אלא פח אחד של שמן שהיה מונח בחומתו של כהן גדול. So the Talmud tells us, what is Hanukkah? It is, of course, when the Greeks defiled the sanctuary, and then when the Chashmonaim came in, what did they find? A little jug of oil. And only pach echad, just a very small jug of oil. And of course, that led to the small jug of oil lasting not just 1 day, but 8 days. That's the miracle of Hanukkah. But if you come to the synagogue, or you're going to open a prayer book over the next 8 days, morning, afternoon, and evening, we are going to add a very special piece to the Amidah. It's called Al HaNisim. We read this on Hanukkah, and we read it on Purim. And it says, Al HaNisim ve'al HaPorkan, God, we thank you for the miraculous deliverance, for the heroism, and for the triumphs of our ancestors from ancient days until our time. And if you read this long paragraph of Al HaNisim about miracles and Hanukkah, there is not one mention of the miracle of oil. Rather, it says this: in the days of Matisyahu, the heroic Chasmonayan Kohen, and the days of his sons, a cruel power rose against your people Israel, demanding they abandon your Torah and violate your mitzvot, and you stood by your people in times of trouble. So we have a problem here, that we have two different miracles of Hanukkah in two different places, and the question is, how do we actually put those together? The very interesting question that is asked about the Jews in Egypt. The question is, did we come out as free people looking to get the Torah and lead a new life? Or were we basically leaving our oppressors and going to find a new piece of real estate? And it's actually doing the same thing, but it's looking at it in a different way. And the same thing is true with Hanukkah. Are we a free people, or are we a people that are being oppressed, and are we trying to run away from something? And so I want to first talk about the oil and the war. And I want to talk about two things that we actually have in Cone Chapel. The first is behind me, which is the Ark. And the Ark has a curtain, if you open the door here, and it's called a parochet. It's a curtain. And behind the Ark, we know, is the Torah. And there are two types of Torah. The Torah shebichtav, the Torah that is written, which is known as the Torah min hashamayim, the Torah from God. And we have the Torah shebe'al peh, which is the oral Torah, which is written by God but has human and divine influence together. And there's a beautiful interpretation that the Torah behind me is very hard to access, to have access to, right? You have to open it. But on the wall here, we have the menorah. And the menorah is 7 branches, not the Chanukiah, right? The Chanukiah is 8 candles. We have to remember this. We light the Chanukiah on Hanukkah to remember that the oil lasted 8 days in order to light the menorah. So if you come over here and count the branches of only 7, it's not that an artist made a mistake. It's rather that the menorah on the wall here represents the menorah that was found in the temple. And how do you light the menorah? It's with oil. And so the rabbis say that the oil is accessible to all of us, just as the Torah shebe'al peh, the Torah that is oral, that is the living Torah, is also accessible to us as well. And so my Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah? The rabbis basically say it's everything and anything that we need it to be. This finding the oil is finding hope and light. That if the Torah only exists within the ark behind me, then what is it to us? But rather, if the Torah represents the oil that each one of us can light, and by the way, who is the mitzvah for? It's not just for me. It's for all of us. Ish uveito ba'u. Every single person has the command to, in fact, light the Chanukiah. So that's step number 1. This oil represents accessibility of Judaism to all. Now I need to ask, what did the Greeks take away from us? Or what did they want to take away from us? And the rabbis tell us that there are 3 different mitzvot that the rabbis wish to take away from us. The first is Shabbat, the second is Rosh Chodesh, and the third is Brit Milah. Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, and Brit Milah. And the answers to those, why did they choose those 3? They could have chosen anything. They could have chosen Kashrut, they could have chosen Pesach, but instead they chose that if they took those 3 things away from us, we could not be Jewish. Shabbat. Shabbat is the eternal witness that in 6 days God created Yesh Me'ayin. God created something from nothing. And God rested on the 7th day. If God is the eternal creator and continuous resuscitator of the universe, and if God's Torah formed the blueprint and formula for the existence of creation, then Greek culture would have to stand aside and bow humbly before the tents of Shem. This Antiochus could not handle. So the Greeks believed, of course, that their culture was above anything. And if they had a Shabbat where Shabbat was above all, then their philosophy that the Greek culture was above anything could not stand. So therefore, Shabbat could not be. The second, Rosh Chodesh. The new moon is the symbol of our obligation to instill holiness into time. Right? When we look at the moon, we see a new month, but we also see fullness. We understand that when we see a sliver of the moon, we see hope going into the next 30 days. It's interesting, this past week I was in Denver, Colorado for the JNF USA conference, and Ambassador Michael Oren spoke to us, and he kept telling us what Israel needs is two things, time and space. He kept saying time and space. Rosh Chodesh is about time and space. It says, man's power to proclaim the new moon proves that time, the symbol of nature's tyranny over man, can be subjugated. When the Sanhedrin hallows the new moon, the festivals enter the calendar and raise it from a record of material pursuit to a vehicle of holiness. Again, why did Antiochus want to take away Rosh Chodesh? Antiochus had to fight this concept, for it meant that culture had value only as a means toward a higher purpose. When you put sacred moments in time, you imbue holiness into the world, and again, Antiochus could not deal with that. So Shabbat, he wanted to remove that, so Greek culture can elevate, and he wanted to remove Rosh Chodesh as well. And finally, Brit Milah. What is it that Brit Milah is? It is a combination of the physical and the spiritual together. I quote, the body must bear the mark of allegiance to God's covenant, the restraining mark that says, you are a servant, not a master. You are host to a soul, and you must elevate yourself to the exalted level. Brit Milah combines the body and the soul. But what's most amazing is when you look at Hanukkah, it in fact has all three of those mitzvot, Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, and Milah. You might be asking how that is. How many days is Hanukkah? It's 8 days. On what day of the creation of a human being is it Brit Milah? It's the 8th day. Hanukkah, being 8 days, always has a Shabbat, and Hanukkah, being that it begins on the 25th day of Kislev, always has a Rosh Chodesh. And so the three mitzvot that Antiochus and the Greeks wish to take away from us are in fact inserted into the holiday of Hanukkah today, metaphorically and spiritually showing that those three can never be taken away from us as well. Just an interesting fact, as you'll see this Shabbat, it's Shabbat Hanukkah, it's the third day of Hanukkah, and so we'll take out 2 Torahs from the Ark. On some days of Hanukkah, not this year, it's one of the only times where we take out the Torah 3 times, because we have the regular Parsha, we have Shabbat of Hanukkah, and we have Rosh Chodesh, but again, this year it's only 2. Okay, let's go to the mitzvah of Hanukkah. How many blessings do we say over the candles? Don, how many blessings? We say 2 blessings, and on the first night, we recite the blessing of Shehechianu. Now, we recite the blessing of Shehechianu many, many, many times during the year. It's when we do something for the first time. When we do something for the first time with Shehechianu. At each of our B'nai Mitzvah, we recite the Shehechianu. A good friend of ours, Raz Goldstein, always says, there's never a moment that you should find that you cannot recite the Shehechianu. But let's look at the first 2 blessings first and understand how Hanukkah is a little different, that you can recite the Shehechianu even if you do not light the candles. We have a concept in the rabbinic tradition that you say a bracha before you do an action. We all know that when you say the motzi, then you eat the bread. When you say the kiddush, then you drink the wine. When you say shahakol niyeh bidvaro, then you drink the water, or you can have a piece of chocolate. When you say borei pri ha'etz, then you eat the piece of fruit. When you say borei pri ha'adama, then you eat the vegetable. But in this case, right, we say the blessing before we light the candle. Asher kishanu tativanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. The second blessing, She'asa nisim lavotenu. We thank God who did miracles for our ancestors. And the last blessing is Shechianu. So the first blessing, Lahadlik ner shel Chanukah, you can only recite if you actually light the candle, because it says that you are lighting the candle. But let's talk about the Shechianu blessing for a moment. The rabbis say that you can recite the Shechianu blessing. It's surprising that Shechianu blessing may not be recited unless one sees the flame. In the case of other holidays, even if one is placed in a situation where he cannot pray, he still recites that blessing. It would appear that Hanukkah is different. Merely being alive on the 25th day of Kislev is not enough. You must see the flame. You must remember what it represents. You must know that we are grateful for the triumph of Torah's lights, right? So on any day, if you're at Sukkot, you can say Shechianu. Pesach, you can say Shechianu. But in order to say the Shechianu on Hanukkah, you in fact must see the actual light. And so now talking about seeing the actual light, we have to talk about where we place the Chanukiah. So where do we place the Hanukkah candles? Thank you, Don. In the window. And that's different than the Shabbat candles, which you're supposed to place on the table. On the table with Shabbat, you're supposed to use the light for Shabbat. But the Hanukkah candles, you are not supposed to use the light. If there's a blackout, you're not supposed to use it to read, to do your homework, to have dinner. But rather, you place it in the window for Pirsumei Nisa, in order to publicize the miracle. If you ever have been to Jerusalem on Hanukkah, they not only place it in the window, but they in fact place it in the alleys of the door outside. Now the question is, at what is the latest time that you can in fact light the candles? And it's a very interesting case, because they say the latest you should do it is when the last person leaves the market. If you close your eyes for a moment and think about Jerusalem, either in the Shuk, in the Machane Yehuda in Jerusalem, the Jewish market, or in fact in the Arab market, right? When the shops are closed and there's nobody there, the rabbis say there's no point in lighting the Hanukkah candles, because the obligation of the mitzvah is for other people to see it. It's not like the Shabbat candle. It's not for you, but rather it is for them, right? And then the halacha goes into many, many different ways. Well, what if you're in a high-rise apartment on Wilshire Boulevard in Manhattan and you can't see it? Then you place it in the window. But what if you're on the 35th floor and nobody can see it from the street? Does that count? And the answer actually is no, because you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of Pirsumei Nisa. But then there's a question, and it's fascinating because I never thought about it until this year, with all of the anti-Semitism going around the world. I never thought as a rabbi I would be asked, should I put my mezuzah away? Should I take off my Jewish star? Should I wear a hat over my kippah? And the question is, during troubled times, how do you do Pirsumei Nisa, publicize the miracle, when you are in fact afraid that if putting the Chanukiah in front of your window will cause harm to you and to your family? Do you light your Chanukah menorah as well? What is the answer? The answer is yes, but you have the permission to light it inside. Because even though others may not see it, it goes back to what we spoke about earlier about the menorah, that it must be accessible and a moment of hope. It can't be just inside the ark like our written Torah, only available to those who have the knowledge to bring it out. But rather, the point of Hanukkah is, as Rabbi Hillel says versus Rabbi Shammai, right? Ma'alin b'kodesh v'lo moridin. That we must go up in holiness and not down. That's why tomorrow night we're not going to light 8 Hanukkah lights, but we're only going to light 1 in the darkest time of the year, and the light is going to grow and grow and grow. And so even in the most darkest times, and this today, literally in this world, is one of the most darkest times of Jewish history, we know that tomorrow night when we light light number 1, we will have that ability to bring that light, to bring that hope. You know, somebody reached out yesterday and said, what about on the 9th day of Hanukkah? Number 1, why don't we have 9 days? And we're going to talk about that in 1 second as well. Let's talk about that. Every holiday outside of the land of Israel, we always have an extra day. right? On Pesach, we have 2 Seders and we have 8 days. On Sukkot, we have 7 days of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret. But in Israel, because they know that they're the first to do it, they only have the 7 days. So why not on Hanukkah do we not have 8 days, but in the diaspora we should have 9 days? And the rabbis explain that, as I said earlier, Hanukkah is not a biblical festival. It's a rabbinic festival, and so there's no need to make sure that we're doing it right. But somebody approached us a couple of days ago and said, how about a 9th night of Hanukkah this year, specifically for the hostages in Gaza? But they said, don't light the candles 9, because there's not 9 spots on the Chanukiah, but rather keep the shamash burning. On day or night number 9, let's just light the shamash, knowing that that light of the servant candle will continue to serve and serve and serve. And so I think we're going to do that tradition this year. Not as halakha, as Jewish law, but as a tradition that the night after Hanukkah, how do you keep the candle burning? You know, it reminds me of Shiva, right? Shiva, the 7 nights when we gather when somebody has passed away at somebody's house. Those nights, even though they're most intense days of mourning, are often the easiest because everybody is around. But day 8 is often the hardest because nobody is there. Our doors aren't open to the world again. And that's why at the end of Shiva, what do? We get up and we walk back out into the world because we have to understand that we need hope. We need that pach echad, that small little jug of oil, to make sure that the 9th day is as warm and powerful as the first day as well. And then finally, we're going to talk about the name of Hanukkah. Many different names. And each of them, I would say, are as valid as the next because each of them have a deep meaning of what this holiday is all about. When the rabbis look at the name of Hanukkah, they split the letters up into many different variations. The one that I love is chinuch, education, right? Chinuch is education, and Hanukkah is rededication. So, of course, we're rededicating the temple as it was defiled by the Greeks. But how do you do that? It has to be through education. When you see the children walk through the halls and learning about the story and living that out, that is Hanukkah. Hanukkah should not just be those 8 days that we light the Chanukiah, but rather every single day that we rededicate ourselves through education. That is how we bring hope and light to the world. Again, I go back to where I was this weekend at the JNF conference in Denver, Colorado, and when Ambassador Michael Lauren, who was in charge of Gaza many years ago, he explained to us the education that goes on within the system of Hamas. He's basically said, not in his words, but in my words, they need a Hanukkah. They have to rededicate themselves to a different style of education in order to bring light and love into the world and not hate and evil. I saw a video yesterday of one of the hostages, a young girl who returned to her elementary school in Jerusalem for the first time after being away for 50 days. And to watch her run into school and be embraced by her fellow students and her teachers, to me, that was the essence of Hanukkah. What was she missing in her life? She was in the hands of evil. Now she was in the hands of good. She was in the hands of love. And she was in the hands of shalom, of peace. So the first, remember, Hanukkah is education, but rededicating ourselves to education. There's a reason why we learn each and every year about these holidays and don't just put the book on the shelf, because we're reading over and over, and as we like to say, the words stay the same, but it is us who have changed. And then if you look at Hanukkah, it's very interesting. The word chanu, means to rest or to encamp, to stop. And the last 2 letters, kaf he, ka, in gematria is 25. So on the 25th day of Kislev, the Jewish fighters rested against the Syrian Greeks. So the word Hanukkah is basically the battle stopped, and then we celebrate that aspect. Again, I can only imagine this year what Hanukkah will look like tomorrow for the IDF soldiers. I can imagine that we're going to see fascinating pictures of soldiers wherever they are. I don't like to use the word celebrating, but commemorating that it is Hanukkah. That once, many thousands of years ago, we defeated the Greeks, and God willing, today, we will also continue to defeat our enemies in a way that will rededicate ourselves to the land of Israel and to the people of Israel as well. Another definition of Hanukkah, the word chen not only means to rest, but it means grace or mercy. The Hanukkah could be meant to allude that the Jewish warriors found divine grace on the 25th day of Kislev. There's an interesting relationship between God and people, especially during times of war. Right now, as you are probably seeing, thousands and thousands of people are going to Israel, but they're not climbing Masada, and they're not doing all the touristy stuff, but they're volunteering. They're volunteering to cook meals for the IDF. One of my friends who's volunteering, she lives in Israel, has said different mitzvot have come about today than have ever done before. So for instance, a lot of young men that are going into battle have requested tzitzit. They want to wear the talit under their uniform. Well, guess what? There's not enough tzitzit to go around in the army because there's so many. And so people are learning how to tie tzitzit in order for the soldiers to wear them as they go into war. Chen. People are finding grace. People are finding meaning connecting with God. Finally, one of the most direct explanations of Hanukkah is that it is related to the dedication of the altar. The Or Zarua says, the name Hanukkah derives from the consecration of the Mizbeach, the altar, for the altar had been destroyed and the Chazmonians rebuilt it. We learn in the Talmud that the Chashmonaim removed and stored increase in the quality of oil through the filling of a nearly empty jug. So it's very interesting. When you go to Eastern Europe, a place that I've been many times, you see synagogues that were never rededicated. Actually, a few are. Let me tell you one story that's really interesting that happened this weekend as well. When you go through Poland, you see empty, destroyed synagogues. There's one synagogue in Warsaw that was not destroyed called the Nojek Synagogue. And I keep mentioning Denver, Colorado, because I had a very interesting experience this weekend at the JNF conference. And we all were wearing our lanyards with our names on it. And mine said Rabbi Sherman, Sinai Temple, Los Angeles. And this young kid, it said his name, and then it said University of Arizona. And he came up to me and he said, I've been to your synagogue in Los Angeles. I said, where are you from? He was 20 years old, and he said, I'm from Warsaw, Poland. 20 years old, Jewish. I said, tell me your story. He said his mother was born in Poland, and his father was American, and he was a Jew in Poland in the 2000 and right now. And then he told me what he does as a volunteer activity. He does tours of the Warsaw Jewish Cemetery with people that come to Warsaw. 80 years after the Holocaust, this young man is not rededicating himself, but he's rededicating himself to education to allow people to understand the past. And here he was in Denver, Colorado with 2,500 Jews and non-Jews learning about and celebrating Zionism, what his ancestors could only imagine they had. And it was interesting because as he spoke, we literally were hearing the shouts of anti-Israel protesters outside the window. It was like a modern Hanukkah, that this little oil, the Pirsume Nisa, we were spiritually lighting our Chanukiah by loving and celebrating Israel, as the metaphorical Greeks were outside saying, no, we want to get rid of Shabbat. We want to get rid of Milah. We want to get rid of Rosh Chodesh. I would say we are in a time right now where not only do we need Hanukkah, but we are reliving Hanukkah. We are reliving the story of Hanukkah. It's interesting also, by the way, if you look at the history books, and if you ask, where do you read about Hanukkah? You read about Hanukkah in the book of Maccabees. There's Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2. And what's really interesting is that there was no Hebrew translation until just a couple of hundred years ago. It was in the Greek. And so the book of Maccabees never made it into the Torah. And once the Torah is closed, then that's it. And so when you read that, though, you also learn this, that the Chashmonaim, the Maccabees, they declared Hanukkah, the holiday of Hanukkah, even before there was a victory. What chutzpah that these people have, that even before they had the ability to have victory, they declared that there was a holiday of Hanukkah. It's chutzpah, but it's such beauty as well. Knowing that this one little light can have the hope for us to continue on and on and on. This is a Hanukkah like no other. Last Hanukkah was very different than this Hanukkah. Rabbi Guzik in her sermon this past week told the story of our young son wanted a gift from Israel when she went last week, and she brought a dreidel because Nes Gadol Hayapo, a great miracle happened here. And as she bought that dreidel in Ben Gurion Airport, she felt that she had the urge to also buy a small Chanukiah which could bring light to the world. And so tomorrow night, on the first night of Hanukkah, we're going to spin that dreidel that says, Nes Gadol Hayapo. A great miracle happened here. We need miracles to happen not just there, but here as well. As you see what's happening on the college campus, with anti-Semitism around the world. And we need that light. We need that light from Israel, and Israel needs our light from here. When I was speaking to Israelis who were at this convention, they told us they did not want to come to Denver, Colorado, because they thought, we don't need that. We have to be with our families in Israel. And then they came, and on Friday night, we had a Shabbat dinner for 2,500 people. And these Israelis were in tears. They told us we needed exactly that. We needed to light that Chanukiah. We needed that drop of oil. And so wherever you are this Hanukkah, whether it's in the land of Israel, whether it's in Los Angeles, whether it's in any country, any city, whether there's a Jew there or not, Pirsume Nisa, put that Chanukiah in your window. Know that that Pach Echad, that little light of oil was a miracle, but the bigger miracle is that you are continuing to light that today. Because as we learn in our famous song that we sing in our schools, don't let the light go out. It'll shine for so many years. Don't let the light go out. It will shine for so many years. We want to wish everybody a Chag Urim Sameach, a Hanukkah filled with light, with joy, with miraculous partnership with Jews around the world. Chag Sameach.